Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the American Center and to this methodology workshop on teaching English. Today our topic is motivation moments. To begin, for those of you that are new to the workshops, my name is Heidi Healy. I was an English language fellow in China from 2017 to 2020. And then I returned home to Utah in the western part of the United States. And I have continued to work with English teachers in China and Mongolia for the last several months. I have my master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages, and I have been working with English language learners both in the United States and in other parts of the world for the last 10 years. And I'm really excited to be with you again today and talk about our topic of motivation and how we can increase motivation in our classrooms. Today I want to mainly cover two main topics. First, I want to talk about what is motivation. And second, I want to talk about the factors that influence motivation and how we can increase and improve the motivation in our classrooms. So to begin with, what is motivation? I'd like you to take a minute or two and discuss with the teachers sitting around you. For you, what is motivation? Great. For me, motivation is why we do something. I really love this quote by Dornier. Dornier is well known for researching motivation, especially motivation in language learners. And he said, motivation is responsible for why people decide to do something, how long they are willing to sustain the activity, and how hard they are going to pursue it. Some of you may remember this quote from our workshop a couple weeks ago on self-regulated learning. Our why is part of our motivation, but our motivation also determines how long and how hard we're willing to work at something. This past couple of weeks, I asked on Facebook what your motivation was for being an English teacher or for attending these workshops, and many of you responded. I think one of the most common responses was your students motivated you. You wanted your students to succeed. You wanted your students to do well on their tests and learn English well. Because of this why, your students, you are willing to work long and hard. You are willing, after spending a day teaching classes, to come to a workshop on teaching English, to learn and gain new ideas. So this is a good indication that your motivation is strong. And for our students, we want the same thing. We want to help develop the motivation so that they are willing to work long and hard. There's a few more things we need to consider about motivation. Motivation is usually divided into two categories. We'll talk about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is doing something because we love it, because we feel passionate about it. For many of you, you teach English, or your motivation is intrinsic. You do it for the love of your students. You do it for the love of the English language. One good example for me of intrinsic motivation was a man that was a colleague that I had in China. This was a man who was a doctor, and he had established a social media group in China about learning English. And His whole goal in the group was to help other people improve their English and to improve his own. I was in the group serving as kind of an expert. If he had questions about grammar or questions about vocabulary, he would ask me and I could respond in the group. He did this group purely out of love. He loved English and he loves learning English. And he continues to do it and to work hard to encourage others to also improve their English. This is a great example of intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when we do things because of either rewards or punishments. Either we want to get something, so we do it, or we don't want something, so we do it. For example, maybe you do homework so that you will get a good grade, or maybe you do homework so you won't get a punishment from your teacher or from your parents. This would be extrinsic motivation. And both of these kinds of motivation are good. One is not necessarily bad, and they can both be very powerful. We just need to understand both of them. When it comes to learning language, we will often also hear reference to integrative orientation and instrumental orientation. And this is the reason why you are learning the language. If you have integrative orientation, you're learning the language because of a desire to interact with another group. For example, maybe you want to learn English so you can talk to people from the United States or Canada or Australia. This would be integrative orientation so that you can interact with the other group. Instrumental orientation is learning the language so that it can be used as a tool. An example of this would be someone that needs to learn English in order to do their job. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I shared the example of the pilot from Lufthansa, Dieter Uchtdorf. And I explained that he felt the desire to learn English so that he could accomplish his goal of becoming a pilot. In his case, English was a tool. It allowed him to reach his goal of becoming a pilot. So he would have instrumental orientation. These more technical terms of motivation can help us better understand it. But what we really want is to know what affects motivation. How can we as teachers increase motivation in our classrooms? How can we help our students be more motivated? I think this is a topic that every teacher wants to understand better. I hope some of the ideas that I will share with you today will be helpful. But I think it's important to understand that motivation takes time. There's not a secret that will instantly bring motivation into your classroom. It's something that we have to develop over time as teachers. The ideas that I'm going to share with you in this workshop come from a posting on the American English site in the American Corner called Fostering Student Motivation. And it's based on a survey and some questions that were posted there to help teachers evaluate motivation in their classrooms. And I will see that you have access to this checklist and to this American Corner from the American English website. So today I want to discuss 4 factors that influence or affect motivation. First, instructional design. Second, learner autonomy. Third, classroom environment and culture. And finally, teacher behaviors. For those of you that have attended a workshop here before, you may notice that some of these topics seem familiar. It's always good to review things that we've talked about in the past and understand how they influence different aspects of teaching. For example, our classroom environment and culture can impact our classroom management, as well as impact our motivation. And these different topics work together, and as we better understand them, we'll be able to better use them in our classroom to help our students and ourselves be more successful. First, instructional design. Instructional design is the way that we plan our class, both over the course of a school year, as well as the individual day. It's the planning of our class, the activities we do, the instructions we give, what we teach first, what we teach second, what we teach third. All of these things go into instructional design. So instructional design ensures that students receive instructions in a form that is effective and meaningful to them, helping them better understand the topics and concepts being taught. So what does this mean? This means that we're giving students instruction in a way that is effective. So we're thinking about, what do I need to teach first, and what do I need to teach second, and what do I need to teach third? Also, providing opportunities for students to interact, to practice the things that we're teaching, to provide better understanding, and also trying to make sure that our instruction is meaningful, meaning that students see the relevance, they see why this is important as we discuss the topics. So I want to discuss 2 questions from the reflection worksheet about instructional design. The first question: do activities incorporate student interests, current topics, and a variety of media that are relevant to students' lives? As I'm planning my instruction, am I thinking about, what are my students interested in? Or what are current events that I could bring into my classroom to make it more interesting and more relevant to students? A couple of examples of bringing current topics into the classroom. One would be a couple of weeks ago when we had the reading workshop and we read an article about Halloween. This was a current topic, and it was something that was relevant to students, a holiday from the United States. So this added interest and helped my students to have more interest in what they are learning. Another example might be for older students in high school, for example, discussing current events that are happening in the country. I remember with my university students in China discussing the question of the use of phones in the classroom. There was a news report that a university in China had banned all use of phones in the classroom. Students were not allowed to bring their phones into the classroom. So we had a classroom discussion about this. This provided great speaking practice for my students, but it also was a relevant topic, something that they were interested in and thinking about. And so it made for a really interesting discussion. Finally, as I've talked about previously, we also want to incorporate student interests. In the examples we give in grammar practice or the examples we give in vocabulary sentences, using things that our students are interested in draws their attention, helps them to pay attention, and makes the class more interesting. One common way of finding out about your students' interests is to do some kind of all about me form or sheet at the beginning of class. This can be personalized to your individual class and needs, but some things I've commonly included on my all about me sheets include the name of the student, some of their hobbies. For example, do they enjoy playing sports? Do they enjoy music? Do they enjoy drawing? Information about their family, maybe some of their favorites, such as a favorite food, or if I'm teaching a reading class, I always like to ask about a favorite book I might also ask some general questions about how students are feeling about the class. For example, how do you feel about reading in English? Or how do you feel about writing in English? Or just a more general question, how do you feel about English? This can help me to better understand my students. Finally, I might also ask them questions about things they are nervous about or things they are excited about. And this can help me to better understand my students and bring in topics that they're interested in throughout the semester. For example, if I know my students are interested in music, they enjoy listening to music or singing, then I might write example sentences about things related to music during the semester to help draw my students' interest and attention. Another way that we can think about instructional design is think about creating a student-centered classroom and giving students the chance to engage with language content in a personalized way. This means letting them share what they think and what they know, not just relying on the textbook or having them read information from the text, but allowing them to share their knowledge and their experiences in order to help the class. One way of doing this is through what is known as a KWL strategy. This is commonly used in reading classes where students list what they know, what they want to know, what they have learned. And I'll post some more information about using a KWL on the Facebook page. Another way that I enjoy engaging my students with content is allowing the students to teach each other or allowing the students to be teachers for a short amount of class. For example, one topic that often comes up in speaking classes is agreeing and disagreeing in English. If I'm teaching students who I know have had this topic before, maybe high school students, I could just have them read the different statements in the textbook or create a PowerPoint and display the statements on my screen. But it's more motivating to engage my students more in the learning. So instead of just having them read the textbook, I'm going to have them produce what they know. So I'd like you to try this. I'm going to divide the group into half. I would like half of you to write down what are statements or phrases for disagreeing in English. And I'd like the other half of the room to write down statements for agreeing. So how do you politely agree in English? So again, one half of the classroom, statements for disagreeing. The other half, statements for agreeing. You'll have about 1 minute to brainstorm a list of different phrases, and then we'll have you share them with the group. Thank you for sharing your phrases and statements for agreeing and disagreeing. If I was teaching the class, after I had all the statements from the students, we would review them. And then I might add 1 or 2 additional statements that the students had missed. But this kind of an activity, we get the same information. The students get the phrases for agreeing and disagreeing, but it's much more interesting and motivating than simply reading the phrases out of the book. It also engages the students in thinking about the topic, so it's more active, which helps students to better retain the language. Also, it's having the students do more work, which creates a student-centered classroom. So there are several benefits to an activity like this, and engaging in activities like this in my instructional design, thinking about how can I engage my students more in learning. A few other ways I might do this include having students do vocabulary presentations. lead discussion groups, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in an upcoming workshop, or have students share news of the day. For example, you might have students share either local or national news, things that are happening in Mongolia or things that are happening in the world that they are interested in. This can be a way of reporting on listening practice, and also a good way to practice summarizing and other speaking skills. But it's more personal to the students because they're reporting on things that are interesting to them. Do you have any other ideas of how you might involve students more or engage them more in learning the content in your classroom? Take a few minutes and discuss. The next way that the next thing that influences motivation is learner autonomy. Learner autonomy refers to the ability of students to make choices and be in charge of their own learning. In the last workshop, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about self-regulated learning and the idea of being aware of yourself as a learner. Learner autonomy is related to that. It's also related to choices. Dornier says, students are more motivated to pursue a task when they feel some sort of ownership. This can be achieved by teachers allowing them to make real choice about as many of the learning processes as possible. So when students feel like they have some ownership, like they have some choice, it helps them to be motivated. So what do I mean by choice? Well, one of our questions from the reflection survey is, do students get to make some choices about what and how they learn? Now, for most of your students, English is a required class. They have to attend English class. And for most of you, you have required things you have to teach. You have to teach your curriculum or your textbook. You don't have a choice about that. But what things could you give students choices about? For example, maybe some of the time you could give students a choice about working with a partner or working alone. Sometimes everyone needs to work alone, and sometimes everyone needs to work with a partner or a group. But maybe sometimes we can give students a choice. You can work on this activity on your own, or you can work on this activity with a partner. As we discussed in our previous workshop, some students like to work alone, and some students like to work with a partner. So giving them this simple choice can help provide motivation for them. Also, we might have students choose which question to answer. Maybe we're working on a grammar assignment, and we have a worksheet with 10 questions. You could give the students a choice of only answering 5. They can choose any 5 they want, but they have to answer 5 questions or fill in 5 blanks. Maybe you can offer them a choice about listening. Do you want to listen to a passage again? Do you want to listen to it regular speed or slow down? This is a really simple choice, but just giving the students the opportunity to say what they think, to voice their opinions, can be really powerful in the classroom. Finally, can you give students any choices regarding homework? For example, in my university with my students, I would give students choices with their listening homework. They had to listen, but they got to choose which TED Talk they listened to. Now, a TED Talk is probably too advanced for most of your students, but perhaps there are other options that you could give your students to choose between listening to one thing or another thing, or reading one thing or another thing. Or even with writing, maybe their writing homework is to write in a journal for 10 minutes, and they can write whatever they want. There's not a defined topic. This gives students some choice and some ownership of their language learning, which can be powerful motivation. Also, with learner autonomy, we want students to reflect on their learning and their progress towards their goal. We've talked about this idea before as well. The idea that students need to be able to see their progress and understand that they're getting better. One way I like to do this is throughout the semester, I will have my students do a 3-2-1 summary. So today I would like you to take a few minutes to reflect and do a 3-2-1 summary. So what are 3 new ideas or activities you have learned recently? Maybe an idea from one of the workshops here at the American Corner, maybe an idea from a webinar or another professional development opportunity. What are 2 reasons you work on professional development? Why are you here today? And what is one question you have about teaching English, about motivation, about really anything? I'll give you a couple of minutes to write down your summary. If you want, take a few minutes and share your ideas and your reasons with your group at your table. I would also encourage you to post your question into our Facebook group. And I would encourage you to answer questions from other teachers, and I will also give you my responses. Other kinds of reflection tasks we might do include things like exit tickets, graphs or charts to monitor progress. For example, students could chart the number of questions they got correct for reading or listening comprehension. Portfolios, where students keep a collection of their work, such as a collection of writing. So something they wrote at the beginning of the school year, something they wrote in the middle of the school year, and something they wrote at the end of the school year. This way, students can see their progress. Oftentimes, English language learners become unmotivated or frustrated because learning a language takes time. It can sometimes be really slow and difficult to see our progress. But when I can look at something I wrote at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the school year, and then something I wrote in the middle of the school year, hopefully I can see my progress. Hopefully I can see, oh, I'm writing more, or I'm writing longer sentences, or I'm using better vocabulary, whatever that may be. And finally, as I've talked about in previous workshops, using a response log, having students evaluate themselves for their participation in their activity in class. What are other ways that you can encourage students to participate in learning in your classroom? Next, I'd like to talk about the classroom environment and culture. We've talked about this in previous workshops, but it's so important that students feel safe in our classrooms, that they feel safe writing in English and speaking in English so that they can learn and make progress. I really love this quote. It says, if students feel safe, they can take risks, ask questions, make mistakes, learn to trust, share their feelings, and grow. We know that asking questions, making mistakes, and taking risks are important parts of learning language. And in order for students to do this, they have to feel safe. They have to feel that the classroom is a safe place to make mistakes and ask questions. So how do we make our classrooms supportive environments? Again, 2 questions. Question 1, are there clear expectations about appropriate classroom behavior? Do students help develop classroom rules and disciplinary consequences in an age-appropriate way? In other words, do you have rules in your classroom? Do students know the expectations of listening, participating in class, etc.? One thing I like to do with my students at the beginning of a semester or a school year is have a short discussion with them and talk about what are things that good teachers do and what are things that good students do. Most of their answers are things that I would tell them anyway, like listen to the teacher, be respectful, turn in your homework, work hard. But there's something that happens in a classroom when it's not just me telling the students what to do, but the students are telling me the things that make a good student. There is power in having students define for themselves what makes a good student. Another thing we want to consider with the classroom environment are relationships. And I've talked about this in previous workshops. We want to develop good relationships between us and our students, but we also want to develop good relationships between our students. And this can be done through cooperative learning. This question asks, do some activities encourage cooperative learning and teamwork? Do they allow students with different strengths to contribute in different ways? There are lots of different activities we can do in our classrooms to encourage cooperative learning and teamwork. One activity that I like to do is called a dictogloss. A dictogloss is a form of dictation, but the emphasis is on having students work together as a team. And it's not on having students produce an exact copy of the text. So first, I have students listen to a story or a text. The first time they can just listen. The second time, I want students to take notes. Again, the focus should not be on copying down every word, but writing down the most important ideas and information. Then students work with a group of 4 to 5 other students to recreate the story. Again, the idea is to not produce the exact same text, but a text that is similar, that has the same main ideas and details. So we're going to try this now together. I have a listening for you. It's about the President of the United States because this last week has been election week here in the US. So as you listen, this first time, I just want you to listen to the text.
Hello, Mr. Obama. The President of the United States has an important job. He or she is the leader of the armed forces. This person executes and enforces United States laws. The President is able to sign bills to become laws. He or she is also able to veto or reject laws. In addition, the President works with the leaders of other countries. Meet Barack Obama. He was the 44th President of the United States. He was the first African American to become a U.S. President. Obama was elected in November 2008. In January 2009, he began a 4-year term as president. In November 2012, Obama was re-elected for a second term.
Okay, now this second time as you listen, I want you to take notes on the listening. Again, don't try to write down every word. You don't have time. Just take notes on the major ideas and details.
Hello, Mr. Obama. The President of the United States has an important job. He or she is the leader of the armed forces. This person executes and enforces United States laws. The President is able to sign bills to become laws. He or she is also able to veto or reject laws. In addition, the President works with the leaders of other countries. Meet Barack Obama. He was the 44th President of the United States. He was the first African American to become a U.S. President. Obama was elected in November 2008. In January 2009, he began a 4-year term as president. In November 2012, Obama was re-elected for a second term.
Okay, now I'd like you to get in a group, take a few minutes and work with your group to recreate the story. Again, remember that you don't need to write the exact words that you heard. The idea is to focus on the main ideas and details. Great work. Let's listen one more time and you can check your work. See how you did.
Hello, Mr. Obama. The President of the United States has an important job. He or she is the leader of the armed forces. This person executes and enforces United States laws. The President is able to sign bills to become laws. He or she is also able to veto or reject laws. In addition, the President works with the leaders of other countries. Meet Barack Obama. He was the 44th President of the United States. He was the first African American to become a U.S. President. Obama was elected in November 2008. In January 2009, he began a 4-year term as president. In November 2012, Obama was re-elected for a second term.
Okay, how did you do? Did you get the major ideas? Again, with a dictogloss, this isn't dictation. We're not looking for you to write down every word that was said. The focus is on getting the main ideas and details. I really like this activity because it helps students to focus on the meaning, it helps them to focus on the listening, but it's also a cooperative activity where students have to work together and use all their different notes to be able to recreate the text. What other cooperative learning activities could you do with your students? A few I thought about were jigsaws, running dictation, and group presentations. What other cooperative learning activities have you done with your students? Our final area that affects motivation is teacher behaviors and knowledge. I like this quote from Harmer. He reminds us that what we do as teachers in our classroom is important. He says, the way we dress, the stance we adopt, and our attitude to the class make an immediate impression on students. Our students notice when we walk in the classroom. They notice the way we behave. They notice the respect we show to them, our kindness, and also our classroom management. And all these things influence their behaviors and the teaching environment. Again, let's look at 2 questions related to teacher behaviors and knowledge. First of all, is the teacher approachable and willing to support learners who require assistance? Approachable means that students feel like they can come ask you questions or ask for help if they need it. So what are some ways that you support students? How do you help them when they have challenges or difficulties? A few ways that I've thought about include choosing partners or groups carefully. Sometimes I just randomly assign my students partners, but sometimes I want to choose partners or groups carefully to help struggling students or students that need an extra challenge. Maybe I let my students use notes or to help them when they're doing a speaking task. Or I keep notes myself on things that I want to help students with. I might give students warnings about things that are going to be happening in the class. If I have a student that's really shy or really nervous, maybe I tell that student at the beginning of class, I want you to share your answer today, so that that student has some time to think about the answer they're going to share. Another question, does the teacher share lessons from her or his own language learning experience, incorporate humor in lessons when appropriate, and make an effort to include current relevant content in lessons? We've already talked about including current relevant content like holidays or current events in our lessons. Incorporating humor can be challenging, but it can also be enjoyable for students. One of the most powerful things that I have found is using my own language learning experiences to motivate my students. An example from when I was in China. There was a day in class that I was going through the roll, naming all the students, and my students were asking me also about if I could speak Chinese. So in very, very bad Chinese, I introduced myself to my students in Chinese. At the end of class, one of my students wrote me this note: "Your terrible Chinese gave me courage." I've never forgotten this. My willingness to show that I did not speak Chinese perfectly, to show that I was trying but failing, helped to give one of my students courage to speak English, even though she did it imperfectly. This is one of the greatest strengths that you bring as Mongolian English teachers. You can share your experiences of learning English, the strategies and the things that helped you to learn English and to become better at English. And this is powerful for your students because it helps them to learn. And this, as I said, is one of your greatest strengths. So we've gone over several different factors today that influence motivation in the classroom. We've talked about instructional design, learner autonomy, classroom environment, and teacher behaviors, and how these can create motivation in our classrooms. So what are you adding to your teacher toolbox today? What strategies and ideas have you learned? Take a minute to reflect and/or discuss with your group. As always, I want to invite you to join us on Facebook. I would love to hear your questions, especially those questions you wrote down in your 3-2-1 summary. Also, if you have any examples about ways that you have increased motivation in your classroom, I would love to hear about it. And I hope to see you on Facebook. Finally, thank you so much for being here this afternoon, for your participation, and for your ideas and sharing that you did with your other teachers today. I appreciate it, and I know that you appreciate each other. Here are my references, and I hope that you will have a great evening, and I hope to see you next week at our next workshop.